Hi, my name is Sarah Bentley Pearson, and I am excited to share my podcast, which features wonderful talent that I've been so lucky to discover in the Southeast. This was born out of a list that I created in 2015 called Sarah's List. And through my work in real estate, which I've been doing since 2005, and styling work, and just my personal life and my personal interests, I've been able to meet so many wonderful people, and I'm excited to share them with you.
Nicole, I'm really so happy to have you here. I love to speak to therapists and people who are seeing things from a way that is just about growing and about getting better. And I listened to one of your podcasts, or I guess it was like a parent forum that
Yep.
you sent me,
Yep. A webinar for sports
a
parents.
webinar for
Yep.
sports parents. And so, I was thinking about my son played basketball all the way until last year and
Okay.
was the kid who was like, "Oh, mom, don't worry. I'm going to get a scholarship and
Yeah.
don't worry, I'm going to play in college." And
Yeah.
just the competition and the amount of talent here in Atlanta with sports in general
Yeah.
is high. And
Significant.
people are like I'm a diplomat's daughter and my parents wipe their feet with the sports page. So like that's not my world and
Yeah.
it seems obsessive here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm from New York. I've only been here 2 years. And
Oh wow.
so both my boys have been athletes since they can walk. They're very competitive, super sporty.
In the city in New
Uh,
York?
in in Westchester,
In
so
what?
like right
Okay.
outside the city.
Mhm.
Um, and coming here which is kind of why I started doing these webinars for sports parents, because the level of intensity and insanity that goes on in sports in Georgia and Atlanta, in the South, I think in general, because the weather's warmer, and so people can be outside more. It's a whole new level, and it's really affecting, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, but the opinion of a lot of people in my field, the mental health of these kids and how they're,
It's
yeah,
crazy, and the parents who are screaming at the top of their
yeah,
lungs from the sidelines, you're like, "Get a grip." I mean,
yeah,
and my experience is really even when my son was younger, I'm not even in the higher levels at this
yes,
point, but it is really a lot, and it's kind of sad because I think if there is so much focus on sports like anything, like if there's just too much focus on one, I loved how you talked about the whole person
yeah,
and that, a lot of these team sports, these kids after college never play it again
yeah,
because that's when and that's when it ends. So with my son, I'm like, well, I really want you to be fit and healthy and have a normal routine of taking care of your body
yeah,
more than anything.
yeah.
But I do, my husband was a 2 sports college athlete, and
Okay.
his dad really pushed him, and as a result, he sees a lot of value in that
Yeah.
and hires a lot of college
Trainer. Yeah.
athletes, but he's in finance, so
Okay.
he sees the discipline and all that goes into it as huge value.
Yeah.
Will you I think that that was something that I enjoyed listening to also is that you talked about, you know, why do we really do this for our kids? What's the point?
Yeah. What's
And
the why
what's
behind
the why?
what we're
Yeah.
doing? And I think I've heard that a lot too, because I do a lot of professional coaching as well. And I've heard a lot that they like to hire athletes because of the discipline, because of the good things that sports gives you. But I would argue that sports, when your husband was in it, and sports today are two totally different beasts.
Yes.
Kids are starting training today at second grade, third grade,
Oh,
fourth
yeah.
grade with private trainers. Thousands of dollars are being spent. When I was in sports, that didn't exist, right? So we have all these travel organizations now. We have all these travel organizations that are pushing private lessons. And if you don't get a private lesson, your son doesn't get one, then you're feeling like they're being left out. So there's this whole enormous amount of stress that are put on kids differently than when we were going through sports. So I understand from a parent's perspective that, yeah, it does all these great things, but it does all these great things when we're focused on those things. But the problem is we're focused on winning and losing. And we're focused on winning and losing and having to be the best, better than everybody else. And we're going to sacrifice time from school, time from friends, times from free play, the things that we need to develop our brains in a healthy way. Then we're really taking all the good out of the sport and turning it into something where now we have 34, 35% of collegiate athletes suffer from depression and anxiety. That wasn't the case 15 years ago, probably even 10 years ago. So that reasoning for doing sports, we really need to like zone in on and try to see like what are we doing to our kids? Who's guiding this? Is it me or is it them?
Yeah.
When my son was playing basketball, he was really driving it because I didn't really grow up in a sports
Yeah.
family. But of course, as his mother, I want to support him.
Yeah.
Now I feel like, did I not push it or drive it enough? But I don't know. I see other kids whose parents really pushed it and drove it. And by 10th or 11th grade, they're getting weeded out.
Yeah.
And it is a depression for children, and especially boys.
Yeah.
I think girls too, but I love how you talked about the whole person and what we're creating, because I'm very interested in longevity.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about longevity and health, some of the aspects are, do you have friends?
Yeah.
Community, are you really close to other people, or are you isolated? um, Purpose,
Yeah.
and if somebody else is driving the purpose, it's not your purpose. And then obviously diet. And then we go into these schools that are all about sports and they're serving Chick-fil-A. It's like so insane.
And then like buckets of donuts
And
after
buckets of
games. Yeah.
donuts, and it's just, I feel like we're kind of out of sorts. But from somebody who grew up in Europe and then came to America, and then when I go back and I visit Europe, I always think to myself, America is the best and the worst.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that, like, other countries, I mean, I know football is really big in Europe, and David Beckham's story was interesting about his
Yeah.
dad, who was maniacal.
Yeah.
And look, well, that some people would say, well, look, he gave the result, but there he is, OCD, like on everything.
Yeah. And is he enjoying life? And I think what you said earlier, which is kind of what I've been trying to tell parents, is that sports is a very small part of your life. It just is. Like there's only so
Yeah,
many
let's
years.
talk about
Yeah.
that, because I loved how you were saying that. And I think it really is important for parents to put that in perspective.
Yes.
So talk about those
Yeah.
statistics.
So when you think about how long you'll actually be able to play sports, in terms of if you're playing sports because you want your kid to play in college, depending on the sport, like your likelihood of actually playing in college, like let's just use baseball, for example, because I follow that closely because my boys play,
Mm-hmm.
but you have like a 6% chance of actually playing in college. You have a 2% chance of playing at a D1. And then you hear parents be like, well, I want to go for a scholarship. Well, the average scholarship is $11,000. And so what
And
is
they're
that?
spending 25,000 a
20
year.
if you're lucky,
Yeah.
right? With some of these people are spending so much. Well, over the lifetime of baseball, travel baseball is $4,000 a year. And then you add on private lessons and you add on all the travel. You're talking about an average of walking away with like $7,000 a year just without taking private lessons. And these are families who that's a lot for them, right? And they're thinking they're getting this scholarship when the scholarship is $11,000,
I
right?
think for
So
those people, it's not about the money. I mean, these aren't like people who are like, oh, I could take my kid to Europe for this or whatever. Like, the family's so invested. It's their social life too.
it is there's that's actually a very good point. I think
Mhm.
that's part of the A, their social life, and then B, just living vicariously through. I see that a lot with fathers who didn't get a chance to play college sports and they feel as though they didn't get a chance because their parents didn't give them the resources or have all the things and they're living through their kid, when the truth of the matter is if you're going to play at a college level, you have to have passion. You have to have a lot more than just skill at that level. And if it's not coming from an internal drive and it's coming from your parents, maybe they get you there, but you're going to be burnt out and you're going to be that 34% that's suffering from anxiety and depression because it's not your journey. So you may have the skill, but it's not your internal journey. And that's where the stress and anxiety becomes super overwhelming because it's not really your passion. If you're doing something without passion, it's to depression, right? So I think parents really need to understand what they're doing. If your kid isn't the one waking up in the morning and taking, their free throws or getting their 150 shots in a day, like they tell you you need to get better, and you have to hire them or hire somebody to get them to do that, they're not going to be the college athlete that's successful and happy.
Right.
Right. It's the kids that are getting up by themselves, self-motivated, doing those things. Otherwise, you're just wasting your money. Let them or put it in perspective. Like you can spend the money as long as they're asking for it. I stopped a long time ago. My son is 13. He's a three-sport athlete, incredibly talented, but he doesn't practice on his own. And it's frustrating because he's really talented. But
Mm.
I decided 2 years ago, I was like, you know what? if you don't ask for a lesson, I'm not giving you one because you don't practice enough on your own for me to be spending the money on these lessons. And so for 2 years, I didn't. My other son, who's 11, he gets lessons once a week because he asked for it and he's putting in the work when he's
Hmm.
not at the court. He's going and we have a batting cage. He's hitting on his own. He's shooting on his own. He's doing all the things on his own. So I'm going to pay for it because he wants to get better and he's going to take what he's learning and executing it. So it wasn't until this year that my 13-year-old was like, hey, mom, I really want to get a hitting lesson. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I'll get you a hitting lesson because he's been practicing and he's been doing the things and he's showing me that he's driving it.
Right.
And I think that's
They
important.
have to love it.
And they have to want it. If I'm doing it and I'm putting my kids in lessons all the time, they're thinking what subconsciously is happening. Oh, my mom doesn't think I'm good enough. She doesn't think that I'm good enough. So I need to have these things because I'm pushing it. Right. That's the underlying thing that happens. And then when they're up and they're hitting and they're trying to be performing in their sport, there's so much more pressure because it's not about their journey. It's about their journey and my journey and their dad's journey and their player. It no longer becomes an internal thing. So I think
But
it's
my
yeah.
husband says something funny about that, and I can relate to
Yeah.
this is that because I don't feel good enough, I'm a hard worker.
Okay.
There's some sort of maniacal
How
drive in there.
yeah, and I hear that a lot from high achievers, and
Yeah.
I would argue, are you in therapy?
Am I well, I am in
But
therapy.
I'm
I've
just
been in
like,
therapy.
and but
Yes.
most high achievers need like they because of that reason that need to
That I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough. I have to be stressed out. The only way I'll succeed is if I'm hard on myself. I have to be hard on myself because that helps me succeed. I think it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Excuse my French. I'm not
No,
sure
no,
if I
no,
can,
no.
but I think it's something that we're taught at a very young age that the belief
I'm not
is
saying it's right.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
the
No, but
result.
yeah. And